Hi guys, I'm Dan at vintagevello.org and today we are going to be tweaking the best performance we can out of this vintage Legnano race bike. Now, if you watched the video we did last year on L Eroica in Tuscany on those Strade Bianche roads in Italy, you will have met this bike. I did the media route on the gravel roads of Tuscany at L Eroica last year, and it performed really well. But that doesn't mean to say there are not tweaks and adjustments I want to make to this bike to get the most out of it. With that in mind, I don't know whether you remember, but I did actually change from a 25 tooth to a 28 tooth rear sprocket. Now that's had, it helped on the climbs, but it did have a couple of issues with chain length. I haven't adjusted the chain length on here. It needs another chain, needs to be a link or two longer. I'll get you in close here so you can see what's got on, but this is common when you move to up the number of teeth on your main sprocket at the back, is that you sometimes need a longer chain, so it definitely needs a longer chain. Also, you may have heard in the video quite a bit of brake shrill. My brakes were squeaking like mad. Now, the brakes on this are fairly effective, excellent cool stop pads on here. However, there was a little bit of squeal before I started the race, and I thought they would bed in, which was a schoolboy error. They didn't bed in, they just got worse. So I've got to adjust the toe in on the brakes. I'm going to tweak the brake lines themselves as well to get the absolute maximum I can. Now, the thing was at Eroica, those Tuscan gravel roads are kind of crazy. You hit ramps of 16-17% for a kilometre, 2 kilometres. You get to the top and then you come down again on the same gravel roads, going away from there, perhaps with a 90-degree bend halfway down, and you're going down at 12, 13, 14% dangerous descent on gravel, on skinny tyres. And you need your brakes to work as good as you can. Everything has to work well to avoid potential disaster. As well as that, 28mm Veloflex on here. They've gone flat at the moment because I haven't ridden it for a few months. But I think, they're tight on here, but I think I can squeeze on a 30 or 32mm tubular. So I've got some tubulars here to replace the 28mm. Just a little bit more. I was getting walloped by some of that baked hard Strade. Another 2mm, 3mm on those tyres will just help by the end of the day to get me through. So I'm going to change the tyres. Also, with that in mind, those horrendously steep inclines. Now, because they're on gravel, you're hitting them. There's a lot of other bike traffic. You can't hit them that fast. Often there are other riders there in the way. And you certainly can't get out of the saddle because you're just going to skip and slide all over the place and risk falling off. So you're generally trying to do seated climbs on 12, 13, 15% gradient gravel on a vintage bike is a super challenge. And sometimes, to be fair, you just got to get off and walk. But a lot of the times, I was trying to just grind it out. You hit a horrendously low cadence of maybe 40 RPM, and it is just terrible. And the thing is, although you make it through, it really burns and bites on those quads. And I rode again the next day, and my plan for this year's 2024 Eroica is again the same media route on the Saturday, and then I'm out there on that antique English 3-speed on the Sunday. So I want to try and desperately save some quads for the Sunday. And with that in mind, the plan is we're going to have to change the cranks. And the reason being for that is BCD, and we're going to come to that in a little bit, but it's a problem with old school cranks that we will come on to shortly. But we're going to be fitting this, which is an SR crankset, and importantly, it's this inner chainring here. This one is a 38, whereas this one is a 42, but you can't really get smaller than 42 on these old school Campagnolo cranks. So a 38 is really going to save me, but we'll come on to the complexities of that shortly. But before I do any of this, first thing I've got to do is just pull a few bits off and inspect this frame throughout for any potential damage. I haven't cleaned it, haven't wiped it, haven't done anything. So I've got to go through this bike and be super careful and check there are no cracks, no issues, no opened up joints, no failed brazing, because it was hellish. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. So the good news is I've had a very close look over all the joints, tubes and lugs, paying specific attention to the dropouts as well on the frame. It seems to have come through the Eroica bashing really pretty well. Can't see any damage there, but of course I'm going to keep an eye out for it when I take it out for a shakedown ride later. Now, first thing I'm going to tackle, I think, is going to be this crankset. One thing I have noticed when I took the chain off is that there is an awful lot of play. I'll get you in close. So one thing I did notice when I stripped this down is that this Campagnolo front derailleur has an awful lot of play in it, and that has also come apart at the back here. So that is effectively knackered. So I've got hold of a replacement. We'll get that on there shortly. Hopefully that's all going to work out great. In the meantime, we have no cracks or issues with the frame. So I'm going to go ahead and start swapping out this crankset. Okay, well, the advantage of having built this only a couple of years ago is it is all coming apart nicely. I'm not finding any bad surprises or anything like that. Now, we're going to be swapping our original Campagnolo period crank for an SR period crank. And the fundamental difference between these two cranks is what we call the BCD, which is the bolt pattern width here and here, and you can see the same on here, and on the SR it's much narrower than on the Campag, and what that means is because it's narrower you can fit a smaller inner chainring. The problem with period Campag stuff is that the BCD is very wide, and 42 is technically the only is the smallest inner ring you can fit. Can get a 41, but that doesn't really make a lot of difference. They're very hard to locate, but 42 is it. Whereas on the SR, much narrower on the BCD, and you can get a much smaller inner on here. This one here, say 38, is just what I want. To go any smaller than that, now a lot of guys out there at Eroica and things like that do run what we call a triple crank, which is a third inner, but we hit a lot of issues then with chain line issues and the length of chain. You need a long cage conversion to be able to handle the extra length and amount of chain adjustment, and I'd rather steer clear of that, especially on something of this kind of period. So these shift to period SR cranks will do the job. But then there was one anomaly. I know I pulled the bottom bracket out because I thought, well, I'll clean it anyway, but this technically, being Japanese, is a JIS standard taper crank. And the Campagnolo, being Italian, is ISO. So that's an ISO crank taper, that's a JIS crank taper. However, I checked over, I've got the spindle here, came out of the Campag, and it turns out to be spot on for the SR crank. So for some reason this SR crank made in Japan has come shipped and manufactured with a rather handy ISO standard. So although I've got a couple of spare cranks and spindles down there ready and waiting to go, I'll just use what was on there, clean it up and get it back together. Well, that's now spinning really nicely. It's all assembled. The crank obviously wasn't going to fit that spindle. Who was I kidding? When I assembled it all up, it fouled the frame. The crank fouled the frame, so that was that. I had to go through the other spindles, find the correct one with the extra length, which is what that JIS is all about. It sixed out a bit further. Now it's cranked up, torqued up, and all fitting on there nicely. So I can now go ahead and carry on with the rest of it. I think it's going to be this shot front derailleur next. Now we have a bit of progress. I've gone ahead, I've swapped out the tubulars for 30mm instead of 28s, and they do look quite a bit chunkier. How they ride, we'll find out in a bit. I've put the chain on, and I've gone ahead and dialed it in. I had to make a few adjustments because we are right on the limit of what an old school Campagnolo Grand Sport rear derailleur can handle. here with a regular cage. Obviously the biggest gearing we've got on here, well the lowest gearing as it were, is a 5213, and then we can shift all the way up to a 3828, and that is a pretty broad range for an old school setup. I would say it's bang on the limit. I don't think I could get a single more gear. The only way I could get lower gearing, I would have to change that 52 probably for a 50 compact or something like that, or 48. That would then allow me to shift down a little bit more if I was putting a 30 on the back. But I would say this is bang on the absolute limit, and I wouldn't be overly happy doing too much on the 5328. I'll show you, but that's just getting a bit tight on the adjustments here. Next thing we're going to do, brakes. First thing, I'm going to put the wheels back on and just deal with that squeal from the brake. So we're going to need some towing.
Now, there was no doubt last year at Eroica I was getting a lot of squeal from both front and rear brakes. I mean, sometimes it acted as a handy warning to people in front of me that I was coming through. But no, it's not really what you want. It is not, obviously it doesn't sound good, but you're not getting the most efficient brakes. And remember, at things like Eroica, what goes up has to come down again. And some of those descents were proper sketchy. And you needed all the braking you could get to get down around the corners at 15, 17% on gravel. It was, you know, hairy. There are a couple of ways of adjusting your towing, and basically what that means is your pad isn't sitting just flat to the rim. It needs to be angled outward towards the back. So you need about a 0.5 mil, 1 mil gap at the rear edge of your rim, between the rim and the pad. Basically, so the front end of the pad touches the rim first as the leading edge, and then it allows the rest to then touch. If the back touches first, that's when you get the squeal. You want the front to hit first, and then it comes around onto it. Old school practice method is to bend the brake arms, but there is a warning with that there is a chance of putting hairline cracks in your brake arms, and I can assure you that definitely can happen, as I've done it once, only once, because now I take the pads off and I will hand file this down to get the correct towing, and that is the way I would recommend doing it. Obviously remember, afterwards you're going to have to wear these in a little bit as well.
Now there we have it. The 1963 Legnano is fully performance tweaked, back together, ready to hit the road in preparation for this year's L Eroica in Tuscany, the 2024 L Eroica. Now admittedly that's 6 months time, but that's not long on the scale of life, and I want to get a lot of rides in on this bike, get a fair few miles under the belt before we get over to Eroica in Tuscany this year. And one thing I do need to show you, one final little trick I picked up last year at Eroica, is this. On the base of your cycling shoe with toe clips and straps, where you would have a little cleat that clips just kind of over the pedal itself. A lot of the guys had these, and these are glued on and serrated, and what that allows you is to get in and out really easily without any risk of getting caught, and it's great for walking on it should you be going up those big inclines by foot, and it's really helps with the confidence. If you do need to bail out because for some reason you've stopped or you've started sliding, it's uncontrollable, you want to get your feet out, then this is a really neat tweak to just give you that ability to get out of there quick. But enough talking, I'm going to get out there in a moment, give it a quick ride and a shakedown and see how it feels, see if it's any better than it was. So just time for a shakedown ride, and yeah, the Legnano is going great. The performance tweaks have really helped it. I mean, don't get me wrong, this was already a really good vintage bike, but now with those tweaks, it's superb. I love the gearing, it's running really well. I took the time, got it set up really nicely. Having the new Campagnolo front derailleur shifting in and out nicely between the two cogs is really good, especially because it's quite a jump between the two, so we need those. Brakes are also much better. I've still got a little bit of swivel coming out of the back left, so I might give that just a bit more tone on the adjustment, but other than that it's great. Tyres feel fine, but I won't really know until I've got them on some gravel. But anyway, there we go. I hope you enjoyed that video. Do like and subscribe for anything that's cool to do with vintage bikes. Thanks a lot.